Hello, welcome to week 6. Today's topic is video games, which I'm really excited about. Um, within the slides, any of the games that aren't referenced with a caption, let me change that, are my personal recommendations for little indie games, and they're all free. So just click on the image if it looks interesting to you. If they have a caption, then I'm not necessarily recommending them. They're good examples of what I'm talking about. All right, so let me start slideshow. All right, video games. What is a game? Can it be art? So obviously this is an art appreciation class, and there's a reason I'm putting it in here, right? So can it be art? So there's many different types of activities that video games can be, and here's a few of them: sport, entertainment, game, art. So sport including competitive physical activity or games which through participation, blah blah blah. So we know that there's a lot of sports games out there. They obviously imitate sports. So games can be that. There's also esports, which is people playing video games at high level. Entertainment, which is just the need to be entertained, just like a movie. A game is like a game. Like think about tag, how that's a game. A game structured in a video game form is a game, video game, obviously, and art. So art again is this sort of undefinable thing that we're talking about, and yeah, that we're going to talk about art in relationship to video games. So video games can be all of these. They don't have to. There's probably more activities that they can be considered, but these are a few things to think about. That video games aren't necessarily just one thing. So single object versus mass media. So a lot of times when we think about art, we think about maybe the Starry Night, how there's one actual real Starry Night painting by Vincent van Gogh. And that's when we think of art, a singular, unique object that only can exist in one place. Of course, there's postcards of it, there's prints of it, there's coffee mugs of it, but there's one original piece. Whereas video games are a mass medium, meaning that it can be reproduced infinitely without any degradation and any loss of authenticity. So there's an in between, which we talked about, which is prints, where it's can be an art object that's made many times over, and they're mostly identical, and mostly with a limited edition. But of course, it depends on what we're talking about, and the medium, and the printing process, or whatever. Um, Newspapers another example. So yeah, when a lot of people think about art, they think about a single object more often than a mass medium or even the in between of prints. I don't think many people consider newspaper as art necessarily, though it may contain art. All right, so there's this game developer called Fuck Game Dev, and he only makes one copy of a game available. Sometimes it's like 230 euros. Sometimes it's only 5 euros or 1 euro. But he wants to limit the amount of people that can get it. I guess sort of an experiment of what a game can be as far as an art object. Um, and he postulate or he says that the owner can do whatever they want with it, and even though it's the same medium as any other game in the mass medium, does that change its value? Um, who knows if this life of a beat fish is worth 230 pounds? I have no, or euros. I have no idea what it is. Only the person who buys it will know what it is, as well as fuck game dev. So I don't know. NFTs is another subject that I'm not going to talk about very much. Basically, NFTs suck. They're pretend scarcity where you basically own a certificate of saying here you own this thing rather than owning anything. Um, if you're getting into them now, it's not worth it. It only really benefits the people who adopted them early. And yeah, so there's a lot of problems with it that are laid out in this video, which is 2 hours and 18 minutes. Obviously, you don't have to watch the whole thing, but artists, for example, like to use Patreon, Coffee, sell merch in order to make some money in a better way that makes more sense and isn't about scarcity and hyper capitalism and such. Games are trying to enter this in some spaces, but luckily there's been blowback from companies trying to implement NFTs into video games. Okay. Roger Ebert on video games. So Roger Ebert is a famous film critic. If you're not sure who that is, he's dead, and he has a very old view on what is considered art. So um, he did say at one point that video games aren't art because there's nothing as good, basically, as amazing films or poetry or writing or whatever, and also that the author doesn't exactly um, control the experience, and that is a downside to him. Um, you can disagree, you can agree, it doesn't matter, but this really got gamers angry because gamers obviously want to consider their thing art, whether it is or not. So yeah, that got a lot of people really upset, and it was kind of funny. And but he also said that here at the bottom, he didn't really play games, so he doesn't really shouldn't really have a say in it. And also he did play some games later on. I forget which ones that he did consider to be artistic. So take that as you will. But this is a representation of um, a famous person with cultural authority talking about how they feel about games without really knowing anything about them. Tale of Tales is an indie game developer who makes art games, which we'll talk about later. They don't necessarily think it's art, um, which is pretty interesting coming from a indie art game developer. But again, we'll get into what art games means later. And Hideo Kojima, who makes pretty much kind of weird games like Metal Gear Solid, Death Stranding. This is Death Stranding, so he doesn't necessarily think that art or games are art. They're more of a service that's meant to satisfy people, and it's more entertainment than art, essentially. Um, so I want you to think about this yourself. Like, what do you think are games art? Are certain games art? Doesn't matter if they're considered art or not. And are gamers whiny and insecure about games not being called art? Yes, of course. Just like I talked about Ebert declaring games not art. Yeah, a lot of people got upset, and who cares about his opinion, right? Well, it does kind of matter in the sense that he does influence a lot of people, just like um, Mickey Rooney did and Morley Safer did with those pieces about modern art. It does matter because they do have opinions that people trust. So, if a critic of culture like movies talked about games being art, it might be more acceptable to the public for games to be considered art. So, um, yeah. So yeah, video games are, at least in the United States, are considered to be art. So the United States Supreme Court ruled that video games were protected speech like other forms of art. So yes, they are legally art. No matter what you think, just in a legal standpoint, does that mean they're artistic? They're as good as any other art piece? Not necessarily. It just means they have the legal categorization as art. National Endowment of the Arts, which provides funds to artists, have grants for video games. Smithsonian Art Museum has video game exhibit, and there's many other museums and galleries that show art in their galleries. And sometimes the art is made in. I'm gonna go more into art games again. I'm getting ahead of myself. All right, interactivity. So we've talked about 4D art in a few weeks back, or 1 week ago, rather. So what sets it apart is the interactivity aspect of video games. So, so the closest thing we kind of have to that is movies, where it's four dimensional, where it's time again, four dimensional being colloquial, not a scientific way of describing it. Um, yeah, and so video games have motion by default. Even if you choose one option at a time, there's still progression as far as time's concerned. Otherwise, it would just be a digital painting or digital drawing. So not only do we have time, but we have interactivity, where the player has some agency within the the piece. So the first one is duration of experience. So the game lasts as long as you play it, right? You can pause anytime, you can quit anytime, you can pause and quit and then not play again. You can pause and then wait 10 years to finish it. So it's really up to the player to determine how long this thing lasts. Of course, the amount of content or the expectations of the game built into it by the developers will sort of more or less give you an idea of how long it should be, anyways. Some games are meant to only last 5 minutes, some games can last hundreds of hours, some games can be played to infinity. And so, yeah, this is an important aspect because the duration is totally dependent on the player. There are definitely some games out there that only last a extremely specific amount of time, and you have control over the character, which is the next point. And so that allows interactivity, right? So even if you are constrained by time, if this game only lasts exactly 5 minutes and then resets, you still have control over the character. Otherwise, it would just be a simulation or an animation. It wouldn't necessarily be considered a video game. So, control over character, how you interact with things. Pardon me, which is the next point. Um, how you interact with game objects and the NPCs, a non-playable character like this. I think cat you're talking to here. That's determined by the person. You can talk to every single NPC. You can talk to none of them. Sometimes you have to. Sometimes, most of the time, it's optional to talk to all of them. So that's up to the player to get what bits of information they glean from the world. So someone who likes to know about the whole story would probably talk to every single character, and that again is control over character. It's the duration of experience, how long this will last, and the fourth point, narrative, how much you'll get out of the narrative. So if you're a speedrunner, meaning if you just want to play the game as complete the game as fast as possible, you're probably not interested in the narrative as much. Although speedrunners do usually play the game to its fullest extent before trying to skip everything that's not technically necessary. Interactivity and choices matter. All right, so most of the games have one linear path to travel through, at least that I've played. Um, but there are some games where they're advertised as choices matter, meaning that sometimes if you pick a certain option over another, you lock out one part of the narrative and experience another part of the narrative. Heavy Rain's a good example. I say good as in it's an example. But basically, like, you have a choice to let a character die or let them live, and if they live or die, that changes how the rest of the story plays out. Pardon me. So there's an idea of choices matter, but only to the extent of what the developers programmed within the game. It doesn't give full control over the game because that's kind of impossible. Um, and that leads us to QA, which is quality assurance. So what quality of assurance does is try to test for every single possible case that a player might do in order to break the game, whether on purpose or accident. So a lot of games have bugs in them, meaning something's wrong with them. Someone can get stuck in a wall, someone can get to an area where they can't get out of. So quality assurance within the studio tests these problems because they're trying to anticipate everything that the player can do. Um, and which is a problem because there's only a limited amount of people doing this job. So when the game is released to the public, that's when everything gets exposed, pretty much, and that's when most some there's like some tiny little problems that wouldn't be caught by QA because there's just not enough people testing every single possibility. Those things can get caught, and the good thing about it, games now is that they can be patched, meaning that they can download a file that corrects some of those bugs that made things unplayable or made things inconvenient. It can even change like the difficulty or change the experience, making it easier based on player feedback. And there's ways in programming where developers can see um, tendencies of what players tend to do and sort of adjust according to that. So before patches became popular, I guess they've always pretty much been available. Um, like when games would be sold on Nintendo 64 cartridges, then you couldn't really patch them, unfortunately. So once the bugs were in, they were there forever. Whereas now, if you buy a CD, since your PlayStation 4 or 5 is connected to the internet, you can download patches to make the games to get rid of those bugs. Um, so this is an interesting field of study to go into to think about what players can do, what they can possibly do, what they're gonna do that's unintended. Um, so yeah, visual kinetic novels. So this is where my husband Amicus comes in. He's part of a visual novel, which I will not give the name of because it's for certain audiences. Let's just leave it like that. But visual novels are basically stories with branching paths. It's mostly just static images with like, drawings or pictures like this. For example, on the right, what should I wish for? Conquer the world by force, rule the world from the shadows, etc. You have choices, and that determines where you go. And then there's a kinetic novel, which is the same thing but without the choices. So it just basically means an ebook, but with visual components. So, do you consider these games? Why or why not? When I read about these, they usually call the person experiencing the player as opposed to a reader. So they do definitely exist within the realm of video games, but they're not. They may not necessarily be considered video games by everyone. Art in video games, a more nuanced look. So, just like comics last week, video games are a medium. They're not just one thing. It's not about shooting military dudes on screen and screaming at them. Um, they have a lot of variety, and there's a lot of things to consider. Some of it's art, some of it's not art, some of it can be art, some of it doesn't have to be art. Um, this section's mostly for people who haven't made games or people who don't play games. So there's different scales of commercial game development. There's AAA studios, which are the big studios. Usually these are games that are on TV commercials that pretty much everyone's heard of, like Fortnite or Roblox. Um, there's also indie studios, which are smaller scale, usually go over them more, and solo developers. But these are the main three things. So the AAA studios, again, like Roblox, Elden Ring, These are the bigger studios. So these can consist of up to like hundreds of people working on them, on all the different aspects of the games, which I'll talk about more. There's a definite hierarchy there from managers, presidents, workers, directors and stuff. A lot of them tend to be towards games as a service that are, instead of being a single experience, it's something that's being continually updated, forever, but not necessarily all the time. So, yeah, these are basically the big name studios. Indie studios are smaller in scale, usually like a few to maybe even tens of people. The definition of indie is confusing. It's not set in stone. It's kind of, you might understand it. You'll kind of know it when you see it, maybe. But again, it's very confusing. Um, so what's cool about this is with the less people, there's more collaboration being made. Whereas in bigger studios, some people are just hammering out details that have already been created by creative directors, for example. This in NDCs, it's more likely that everyone has a hand in it, though that's always, obviously not always going to be the case. Smaller budget, smaller games usually, and most struggle financially. Solo developers. So these are literally one person game developers, one person studios. So Valley, Return of Obra Dinn, for example. These are examples of games made by one person. So what's cool about this is that there's complete creative control as long as there's not a publisher interfering, um, which is great because this becomes a more singular experience based off the imagination of one person, and that tends to make things kind of a little more experimental, a little bit more out there, which is my preference. For example, Sylvie is this cat girl. She makes a lot of really funny, silly games. A lot of them are about cats, like this one called "You Are Such a Soft and Round Kitten." Um, so ideally, the vision is uncompromised, but it's a lot of work. The person who made Stardew Valley, named called Concerned Ape, um, he had a lot of, I think, back issues maybe. Um, but yeah, he suffered a lot during the development of it, and probably could have used a hand to help out. But yeah, it can be dangerous depending on the scale of your game, and most don't really make it unless they're like very successful. Like again, Stardew Valley. Like Concerned Ape's really lucky that he made it, and he's probably very rich now. But most solo game developers don't really make that much money. There's also hobbyist game developers who don't fall within the commercial area. People who just make games for fun. I'm one of these people. This is my internet friend Merrick Kapolka. Um, I can't pronounce the name, but it's the name of that Italian song that's supposed to sound like English, like Princicola Canuzzi or something like that. And this game's available for free. It's just a fun thing to experience. So, video games are not just one thing. So, obviously, video games, when you see them in movies, you see things moving on the screen, but you can also hear like bleeps and blips. Obviously, they have sound. We know video games to have sound. Um, but I'm going to talk a little bit more in detail what can go on. Pardon me. Um, but it's a lot of different media within one work. And so there's a German word for it. I'm going to try to pronounce it. Gesamtkunstwerk. That encompasses many forms of art into one object. So again, it's an amalgamation of many different things coming in to form one single product. This game in particular, Super Starduck, actually has a novella component to it, which is very rare. I thought that'd be fun to throw in. So there's many roles within the game industry. So art and creative jobs we'll talk about a little bit more. Programmers are the people who make the code, who make the game run things. Essentially, without programming and the programmers, the game would just be art. on screen and nothing would be able to move. Um, the, they deal with all the interactions that happen within the games. They're pretty much the invisible backbone. Anything that's invisible is probably done by programmers. Managers, producers, obviously those need to exist at some point, depending on the scale of the studio. Indie game studios can have these type of people, but not necessarily. Whereas AAA industry definitely has these, and there's managers and producers not only for like the entire game, like the president, but different sections like manager of the art department, manager of the sound department. There's also people who manage overseas production because games are so big that sometimes some of the work is um, I forgot that word, but some of the work is done overseas because there's not enough people within the local studio to get everything done. So they need to outsource the work. There's technical people who help with technology and servers. This is important with online games where you need to have the servers running. Um, Making servers run, which basically helps connect people through the internet, isn't easy. It's very technical and intense. I know nothing about it, but I know that I couldn't do it. So that takes a huge team, especially because games, they need to have very little latency. Latency meaning what you see on screen and what your input is. So the longer it takes for your input to get read by the system, um, the harder it is to play, and everything kind of falls apart. There's also business people and marketers. So not only do you need to make the game, but you need to market the game as well. And there's specific departments for this. Of course, people who are more business oriented or have PR degrees, public relations degrees. So all of this really helps make a game sell. If you're missing some of this within a big game, you're not going to do anything. All right. So, more specific roles, I'm not going to talk about these, but if video games are something you're possibly interested in or you're passionate about and you're not sure what to do, here's a lot of different creative roles. So, this includes like the UI artist who creates basically like the display, UI, the user interface, like, oh, here's how many lives you have left, or, here's how many friends you need to go talk to. People from visual effects artists, which I'll talk about in a bit, um, lighting, environment artists, animators, 3D modelers, character design, technical artists, level design, audio stuff, writing. So there's a lot that goes into video games, right? One person can make small games like this, but in order to do all of these things, you definitely need separate people. Um, so yeah, the bigger the scale, the game, the more people you'll need to do these jobs. When it comes to indie studios, a lot of the smaller indie studios will have multiple people doing multiple things. Some of the roles overlap. Some people may do half the character design, the other might do the other half of the characters, stuff like that. So again, depending on the scale, depends on how many people take on how many roles. Here's my daughter. So I got her about a year ago um, from this lecture, and she just shed her skin a couple of days ago. So I just want to show you that. It also is giving me a break to drink some tea because it's about the halfway point. All right. Types of arts. So there's fine art developed primarily for aesthetics or beauty, decorative arts, which are arts and crafts, which we talked about earlier, and applied arts, which is applied design and decoration to everyday and essential objects. So think about where you would put video games under. Think about the different games. Where would you put them under? Um, I would say it definitely depends from game to game, what their purpose is, which we'll talk about later. Um, but yeah, this could be kind of any of these. High art versus low art. So high art again is what we think of a singular, expensive object, a paint, usually a painting on the wall. Um, High class, whereas low art, it's mass culture, things that can be infinitely reproduced, blah blah blah. What do video games fall under? So remember when I said that games can be copied infinitely? And then there's fuck game dev who only makes one copy available. Does that make that high art all of a sudden? I don't know. That's something that's kind of up to you to decide. But I'll probably talk about high art versus low art in the later lecture. But essentially, it's a kind of a way to be elitist and classist, to sort of only because only people can afford high art and lower class people can't really afford it. So it's kind of a way to sort of be classist. Art games. Okay, so art games are basically the weird games, like how there's this genre of rock called art rock or art pop, where it's basically a little bit weirder, meant to be more provocative. Um, it's kind of where the intention and the messages or the aesthetics are meant to be a little bit more provocative, trying to make you think a little bit more, as opposed to games that are about social aspects or competition or trying to complete a specific objective or whatever. So art games is apparently its own genre. In doing some research, it's kind of fuzzy what an art game is, of course. Um, but art game again is its own genre that it can include like platformer mechanics, like jumping around or being a first-person game where you explore. But these generally tend to be more of the weirder games again. Um, can you tell if it's an art game? Um, there's no real way to tell unless like the developer specifically mentions that, or it could just be a game that a lot of gamers think this is trash. This isn't a game. That's another distinction you can make. And the criticism is like it's pretentious. Sometimes the games aren't meant to be fun, but like comics, they don't have to be fun necessarily. And I'll talk a little bit about more about not fun games. And it implies the superiority to like non-art games, which is valid. Um, but yeah, it's a really weird distinction to make an art game or intentionally make it. Um, I don't know. I don't know. It feels weird to me, and I don't have any solid feelings about what it should be, what it shouldn't be. I just kind of enjoy games as they are and don't really think about the distinction personally. I will say I definitely gravitate towards weirder stuff just because that just that just happens with any medium like movies, music, books. I like weirder stuff, but not to the exception that I don't like mainstream stuff because obviously if there's a lot of work put into some bigger budget stuff, like they can be spectacular, of course. Um, Video game art. So this it's different than art game. Video game art means art made within a video game engine. So I wonder if I can play this right now. So this said run illustration. So this is considered an interactive illustration. So it's not supposed to necessarily be a game. It's just, oh, here's this thing I made within this video game engine called so that's all this is, really. It's not meant to be considered a game. It's just, hey, like I know how to work with this engine, and let me make something cool with it. And so, for all working, created this situation called Forest. Um, so yeah, again, there's a lot of different things like this, and some games might just be game art or video game art and not be a game but they have the game attached to it just because it signifies, okay, a video game engine. A video game engine meaning the program which in the video game is built. Game art design. So this is art that's created within the game. So for example, in this game, it would be like the textures here, the words here, the glitching here. Those are like people, art directors, storyboard artists, texture artists, which we'll go over a little bit more. They create the game art design. Again, that's within a video game, the art that goes on. Here's our shaders and particles. So this is what a VFX person does. The reason I have this on a specific slide is for two reasons, actually. So the first one is like, this is pretty. This can be considered art. Even though these are just technically part of a game, such as like a, what is it called? Like a party popper. Like this could just be in the game as a party popper, but it's also can stand alone as its own piece of art. Also, VFX, the field of doing visual effects, is vastly understaffed. At least it was a few years ago when I started doing this lecture, and unfortunately it does take math and physics education to really understand how to do this, but it's a really good field to get in if you're okay with doing art, the intersection of art, math, and physics. So I'd recommend that. How Doom renders a frame. So content warning, there's going to be a shotgun and a bloody demon. So this is a layer by layer of what goes on within a single frame of a game. And within this game Doom, there's 60 frames a second. So this is 1/60th of a second. So you'll see layers of how it's black and white. That's depth. For example, like how it goes from closer to farther. The closer it is, it's darker. The further it is, it's wider. That's like one layer that goes on in games. And then there's another one, for example, this shotgun, how it's black at the beginning, that's called screen space. So that's a layer, meaning like it's what shows up on. It's hard to explain. And the UI, which has this 50 with life bar on it, that's screen space as well. There's fog added, lighting added, colored fog added, normal maps, bump maps, all sorts of effects going on just to render this one frame. So to make this game look as good as it is, there's a lot of processes going on. And so this one scene probably had like up to 100 people working on it. Not frame by frame, but of course, because the player controls the inputs. But just all these layers of effects really show what goes on in a modern video game. So texture art. So this is a question for you. Is this art in itself? So on this picture right here, we see this little window where we have this pixel art editor where it says hi with these little pockets of color. If you're just playing it with it like that, you can consider it a little pixel painting, right? But when you put it within a game onto a surface where it repeats ad infinitum, does it cease to be art? And so think about when an artist, for example, like making the textures on the wall to make it have this like bevel or whatever, an artist has to work on that. But when it becomes part of the environment that you just kind of run past, that you don't necessarily need to stare at because it looks like part of the place and nothing else, is that art? Does it cease to be art? How does that relate in terms of the whole game? How does that relate in terms of just staring at it? Like, you can stare at it like a painting. You can stare at anything in a game like a painting and just study it. Most people don't, let's be honest. I do sometimes, and I get made fun of by my friend Weil for doing that, which is silly sometimes. But think about like what part of this is art, what isn't art. I personally, it doesn't matter to me, but it's fun to think about. All right, so what are the purposes of video games? So the purpose of the game, I'm just going to read this, is determined by the intent of the developer and the experience of the player. So the intent of the developer, meaning what they want to happen, and the experience of the player is what does happen through playing the game. It can change with different modes within the game. So a lot of games now are coming with a difficulty called story mode, which is just a way of saying there's no combat, there's no real challenge to it. You just want to experience the narrative that's happening. And there's of course modes called like Nightmare, for example, that makes everything extremely difficult. And going from extremely difficult to having no challenge really changes what the game is about. And I'm going to talk about tourism mods later on. It can be altered depending on how the user chooses to interact with it. So, depending on what the user does within the game, like I said, a speed runner will just try to get through the game as fast as they can, whereas someone who wants to experience the whole narrative will probably talk to everyone that they can. So that really changes how you play a game and what the purpose is for you. So it can be broken, exploited, or altered as much as you choose to do so. So this is a portion um, of a longer comic that kind of shows how, for example, in the Green Demon challenge in Super Mario 64, where you try to avoid being hit by a one-up mushroom, which in normal game context is a desirable thing. So there's different ways to sort of challenge yourself within the game's rules. Use your own set of rules. So that changes the purpose of a game. So what are some purposes of games? Think about this for a few seconds while I get a drink of tea so my voice doesn't go out completely. All right. So when I did this slideshow for the first time in 2019, this is what I came up with within a few minutes: competition, entertainment, toy, education, socialization, exercise, propaganda, artistic expression, making money, etc., etc. So just like I think it was week 3. Like, what is the purpose of art? What are the purposes of art? What are the purposes of games? There's a lot of overlap that can happen, of course, but since games are more interactive and they require more physical, or not physical, more player input or input from the audience, rather, they will tend to require different things and therefore have different purposes. So I'm going to give a few examples, not everything. I'm actually going faster than I intended, which is good. So this one is just an artistic expression. Basically, you walk around the city and just look at pretty things. There's no real goal to it that I found or that I think exists. It's just basically an art piece where everything's procedurally generated, meaning like the program creates these environments for you in different ways, and the next time you play it, it'll be a little bit different. This is like kind of a personal diary entry in a specific game engine. Chex Quest was a game that came with Chex, the cereal, that was literally a Doom clone or a modification of Doom, the shooting game. Yeah, it's actually pretty good. But of course, the idea of this is to get kids interested in Chex by including a video game. I think it did a really good job, if I remember correctly. Dear Esther's kind of entertainment, exploration. Yeah, I don't want to talk much about that. It's kind of like a toy to play with. There's goals like getting to see every animal and learning about them. But it's kind of, there is an end goal, I think, but it was just fun to play around with, and that's it. Game tourism mods. So this one's pretty fun. So game tourism mods are basically for made for first-person shooter games, where the goal is to get to the exit or some other goal that they'll have you do, where a lot of the action is shooting enemies, right? So game tourism mods are basically a set of modifications to the game to get rid of that combat element. Because sort of the philosophy behind this is the fact that when there's all this action going on, you're not really appreciating everything that's going on. Could also just be you just want to see what the space has to offer. You might want to get inspiration for art, or you don't want to shoot things like you think that's too violent. Which all of those are valid reasons for this. So yeah, this really again refocuses the energy that or attention on the game's architecture, aesthetics, storytelling, and atmosphere. So this is radically altering the idea of what a video game can be by removing the intention of one of the intentions of the author. It keeps in the intention of telling a story, being inside these cool environments. But as far as like the design of the combat, that's been removed. So it really changes your perception of how the game can be played and it be experienced. Heavy Rain, not a great game, but it's again basically a visual novel, but with a little bit more interactivity. Islands, play a toy, brain fitness, relaxation. Not much going on here. It's a cool app that you can play. It's fun. Joy Exhibition is a really cool one. So this is an exhibition that you create. So you're given paint guns instead of shooting guns, and you're given these canvases that are kind of like this, but in the hidden room, with different effects on it. And so when you make these paintings, they show up in this exhibition space where these non-playable characters like go and look at the canvases. So this is a artwork creation engine, although I think you can export the paintings out to JPEGs that you can, put on the internet or whatever. But the main audience is for these not sentient, non-controllable player characters, which is kind of a cool thing to think about. Mirror's Edge Entertainment Exploration, I just picked it because it's beautiful. Naissance, it's French, I don't know how to pronounce it well. Yeah, this is a story-based game that's about exploration of a megastructure. It definitely falls on the artistic side of the spectrum. This is definitely an art game because it's mostly about mood and lighting and feeling insignificant in a giant space that doesn't care about you. There's jumping sections where you have to jump certain places, and there's some puzzles, but there's no combat in it, so it's kind of a really weird mood piece. One of my favorite games because it just has this really weird effect on me. It's definitely a cult classic. Overwatch, this is a big one because there's a lot that goes on to it. It's competition and socialization. So most of you probably are familiar with it. But yeah, it's an online only game, I believe, where you basically like shoot other people or capture the flag or other mini games. I don't like playing against other people. I don't like competition. But it's a lot going on because not only do you have this like gameplay where you fight against other people, but there's backstories to all these characters. So it's a really interesting study of what games are, what they can be in the modern age, even though this is like probably 6 years old by now or something like that. I should probably replace it with Fortnite or Roblox or something. Yeah, it's pretty interesting. Red versus Blue, which is a series by a YouTube troupe called Rooster Teeth. So this is machinima. What this means is taking a video game engine and making an animation or like an animation cartoon with it, basically. So the the player doesn't control anything. They're just videos that you press play on, and it does it all for you. So it's using video game engines as a medium to make a TV show or a video. Just like how I talked about art games or video game art, where video games were used to make artistic pieces. This is basically the same thing, but instead of art, it's like a show, entertainment. Um, we can talk about the difference between entertainment and art forever, so but let's not. There's too much to go into that. Another toy. This was a gift, actually. It was for a Secret Santa. This is competition, just silly boys fighting each other. Screensaver collection. So screensavers don't really need to exist anymore. They're made for screen burn-in, which isn't really a problem with today's monitors. But what this is a collection of really just cool, relaxing scenes that you can see on your computer, but they're made within the game engine. This one is Unity. So this is something you might put on if you have friends over and you want to put something on the TV and you don't want to have to think about it, and this will just go on forever. This is also called a simulation, which means things going on like physics, pardon me, or for example here, like lights going on and off, river running, these things interacting and these things happening in real time within the game engine. That's called a simulation because it's simulating something. When you add some interactivity to it, like maybe able to make the camera move, then it might become a video game. Again, it depends on your definition personally. The Sims, which everyone is probably familiar with, propaganda, entertainment, etc. Capitalism. But it's fun. It can be fun. Star Wars Battlefront, that's a dead meme. Wii Fit, exercise, entertainment. I've never played any of these games, but you've probably seen some commercials or someone playing, like maybe the Ring Fit, Nintendo Ring Fit or Wii Fit or whatever it's called, of using video games to exercise and get in shape or whatever. And VR can be a way to do that. I did play VR one game called Super Hot where I was not only was I sweating really hard, but like my legs became so stiff and I couldn't really feel them after playing. Like it really was intense. And last slide, the ZM Garden. So this is a gallery of art created within video game engines. So this had maybe like 30-40 artists or so. My art's not in this trailer. And it's all put together into one quote unquote video game. So yeah, it's a really cool way of implementing artwork within a video game engine in the museum format. So, so like this is a map to like, oh, here's an art here. Here's different buildings you can go into. So yeah, this kind of explored like things that couldn't happen in real life, in the museum form. Some of them are static images. Let's see if I can find any. Let's see. Well, that'll be okay. So like back here are just regular digital images that could probably be printed out with a printer, obviously, and then in front of it is like this puppy that's moving. Yeah, you can make an animatronic puppy like that, but there's a lot of things you can do within video game engines that aren't possible within the space of real life, such as that, or transporting to a different universe, essentially. So yeah, this is or the way you view an object, and based on the camera angle, position, how close you are to it. There's a lot of exploration of those kind of ideas that were done in this. So yeah, back to the beginning. what is a game? Can it be art? So this is something you want to think about more um, after this lecture. Like, what did you learn from here? Think about how the next time you play a game, how is it art? What part of it is art? Try to think about these things and sort of understand everything that goes into it, from the visual effects to the UI, to the textures and stuff. Um, but yeah, so that's about it. We're ending a little bit early. Thanks for stopping by. Take care. Toodles.